Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Brittany Smith. California legalized recreational marijuana in 2017, which allows people over 21 to buy and consume cannabis products legally in California. Since the legalization, there's been an increase in use of marijuana, but there are still limitations in the workplace, the law, and social environments. In this On Point discussion, we will talk about the legal ramifications of using marijuana for residents of California, including some of the issues they may face with law enforcement. We will also take a look at the misconceptions that users may have about the drug and the psychological effects marijuana can have on people who use it. We also discuss the differences between CBD and THC and how they are viewed differently by the federal government. 21 other states have already made marijuana legal for recreational use. On Point's Amari Martin has more on this discussion.
Thank you, Brittany. Joining us today, we have Dr. Steve Silver, staff psychologist and alcohol and drug counselor at CSUN's University Counseling Services, and attorney Lisa Mattern of the Mattern Law Firms. My first question, Attorney Mattern, since the legalization of marijuana in California, any surprises on how it turned out?
Well, I think one of the biggest surprises that people have is that they thought that prior convictions that they had would automatically be cleared, and that's not the case. Obviously, you still have to file papers, go to court, have prior convictions expunged or taken off your record. So a lot of people thought that would happen automatically. That didn't happen. Also, I think a lot of people thought that they wouldn't be stopped, or the police would just leave them alone if they were, let's say, using some kind of cannabis in public or something. And that, again, is not the case. So there's certain protocols as to that, and the police are very active in enforcing laws regarding cannabis, marijuana, even with legalization.
Dr. Silver?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I guess just a thought about the legalization piece as well. On campus, I think there's some misunderstanding, whether it's in student housing or whether it's on campus, that because it's legal that students can now smoke openly, which isn't the case. Students aren't supposed to be smoking cigarettes on campus either, and so yeah, I think there are a lot of misconceptions that go on. And in terms of kind of moving away from the legal piece, I guess the question is surprises with the legalization. And I guess it's not so much of a surprise to me because there is research on this, but a lot of students that I meet with at University Counseling Services who have either their own concerns about their marijuana use, or if they've been mandated to meet with me either by student housing or through student athletics, there's an assumption that because it's legal, it means that there are not risks that come along with it, or that there's even less risk than there is. And research actually shows over the past number of decades that as the perception of risk goes down, which it is now, usage goes up, and there's a wider gap now, which leads to increased risk. Not to say that everyone who uses, to whatever degree, is going to develop a substance use disorder, but I also think that it's putting, or I don't know what word to use necessarily, but I think that people can be not as cautious as they should be with their use because they think that it's legal, there are no risks. But THC content has gone up in both like the actual flower and the extracts. That's a whole nother conversation though.
And also, Ms. Mattern, what are some of the common types of cases and issues you have seen since the legalization of cannabis?
Are you talking about recreational use when you say legalization?
Yes.
Okay. So what are some of the
common types of causes and issues you have seen?
Well, I think that there's a lot of problem, and this might be with the students too, understanding the difference between a medical user or someone who has medical and can use at a different age, and someone who is a recreational user and the age is higher. It's more like for alcohol, so it's a 21. And a lot of times, obviously, we get people that are 18 or younger that say, well, it's legal. And there can be ramifications that you see in court with that. However, I would say it's kind of gotten to be a lower priority since the legalization. There's just not as much enforcement on that end. There's still enforcement on, like of manufacture and things like that, or sales. They want to make sure that there's some kind of quality control, because that's a really big issue. Products being pure, you have people selling food and somebody made this at their home, so, or wherever, and there's an issue of quality control, and so I would say that.
Dr. Silver.
I honestly forget what the initial question was, because it was about cases, I think. So
common types of issues you see in the legalization of cannabis since it has been legalized.
Yeah, I mean, actually, funny enough, I think of edibles, and more and more, because I've worked in counseling centers on a couple different college campuses going back 6 years, 7 years, and I have noticed an increase specific to edibles, marijuana and other drugs in general, but with edibles, people misunderstanding how long it takes to take effect, and so people, and that's on top of not knowing how much THC content there is in the edible. And so what's happened on a number of occasions for people, sometimes with student housing, because if anyone in student housing is ever hospitalized for intoxication of any kind, then they need to meet with me for one meeting, and it's up to them whether they want to get some ongoing support or not. But people will come in having either thrown up without alcohol in their system even, or have had a panic attack, or just feel nauseated, and a lot of the time it is because they've eaten, say, a quarter of a brownie or a chocolate bar that they've gotten, and 15 minutes passes, and they're used to smoking, and that's within a couple of seconds that you feel the effects. And so once they aren't feeling an effect after 15 minutes, they say, what the hell, this isn't working. So they eat more, and then they might even eat more after that, and then give it a half hour to an hour, 2 hours, sometimes within that range, it hits them, and it's just full force, and it's very unsettling and uncomfortable for students sometimes. And so that's been happening more and more. It's still not super common, but I'm sure there are some cases where that happens and they never make it into our center that I just don't know about them. But I think with along with the legalization of marijuana, I mentioned extracts earlier. So, butane hash oil, which is like dabs or butter or shatter wax, whatever you want to call it. When people are saying, and I talk to students about this all the time, because my approach to substance use is not, just don't touch it and you won't have a problem. I think that's way oversimplifying the issue. I don't think that substances have an inherent goodness or badness. They're just these things that do something to our brain. But I do talk to people about just knowing what some of the risks are. And if someone's saying, yeah, it's legal, it's just a plant, sure, but as higher THC levels, as high as like 95, 96% in some of the extracts, are becoming more common, and people are smoking that thinking there aren't risks. They are putting themselves more at risk. And again, it's not to say that 100% of the people who are smoking extracts are going to develop more of an issue with it, but they're definitely more at risk for it.
If I could just a little bit piggyback on what he was saying, one thing that we've really seen a lot with cases is an increase in DUI. DUIs, marijuana-related DUIs, where law enforcement wasn't really proceeding against them as much as they had been in the past. They wouldn't, because they're so difficult to prove. Honestly, they're practically impossible to prove. And so, but with the legalization of marijuana, you notice that you have law enforcement now with these breathalyzers for marijuana, and coming up with all this junk voodoo science to try to prove these cases. So you are seeing an increase in that.
And my next question is, for those that are unfamiliar with marijuana laws in California, what are some of the common misconceptions about where and how it can be consumed?
I think one common misconception is the idea that you can just have as much as you want. I've got a trunk full of marijuana. I mean, some people, you have situations, I've had clients that are young people, they can't keep marijuana in their house, so now it's in the trunk of my car. So I've got everything I've got all my dabs and wax and everything in the car. And then I'm driving around, and then here comes Mr. Police Officer, and he wants to know, why do you have all these things in your car? And he's not really interested in hearing about how your mom doesn't want it in the house. So, that's a misconception. The idea is have an amount for personal use that you're carrying with you, unless you're transporting it to or from a dispensary or whatever. So that's a pretty big misconception. And also, too, societal rules, like he talked about. The idea of people, you're in the dorm or something and you think it's okay. There are rules. There are rules that are enacted by CSUN and other universities that say, okay, you can't do this. It doesn't matter what the state of California says. We say you can't do that, and you have to follow those protocols and rules.
Dr. Silver?
I don't know that I think you could speak to the legal aspects more, but yeah, just the piece that we've both mentioned now about campus rules, and it's a multi-layered issue. Federally it's still, right? Federally it's still illegal, but states have legalized it, and who knows what will happen with that in the future. But then you get to even more of a micro level, like the college campus, and students still can get into trouble for smoking.
Specifically when it comes to driving under the influence, how does the law handle drivers using marijuana, since there is no set test such as a breathalyzer for alcohol?
Okay, so officer pulls somebody over, they think they've been, let's say, smoking marijuana. They're going to say they smelled something, whether they smell burned or they smell fresh, and they're going to initiate that DUI investigation. And one of the problems that law enforcement has is they don't have the tools. They don't have a breathalyzer for marijuana. They don't have any what we call field sobriety tests. Those are the tests where you see, the person putting their fingers to their nose and walking the line and everything. All of those tests were designed for alcohol. So they have no validity whatsoever as to marijuana. So when the officer pulls over someone for a marijuana stop and they start giving those tests, all junk, and it's not going to help them prove that DUI. Now they don't have a breathalyzer. How are they going to prove it? And the issue with marijuana and the amount of time it stays in your system, and you're a doctor and you can speak to that, and it stores in your body fat, and how long you can be positive, have a positive THC result and have smoked any marijuana. So those are all factors to look at, yeah.
What limits are there on the amount of marijuana a person can possess on them and transport in a vehicle?
Okay, so what you should have is what they would consider to be a personal use amount. So it used to be, if you have like this ounce or less, and then they have something they used to call like a 420 exception, like your doctor says that you need more. Some people need more, or it might be how they use it. Like, let's say you vaporize it and you have to grind it to vaporize it. So you're using more, and I'm talking about flowers now. Mm-hmm. So you're using more. So that requires me to need more, so I need to ask my doctor for a recommendation for more. You should have what is a personal use amount, and what that is going to be a question for the district attorney if you get stopped. So you don't want to have everything that you have. I mean, this is just to be on the safe side. You can have 100 pounds in the car, and it might be fine, but you don't want to put yourself in that situation. You want to have a personal use amount, so that if you're stopped, you can say, you know what, this is a personal use amount. I was taking it from here to there. Otherwise, law enforcement is not as knowledgeable about cannabis as myself or the doctor. So they smell something, they see something, they're going to arrest you. And then once you get arrested, you see what I'm saying, you're already inconvenienced. So it kind of doesn't matter how it turns out. Maybe you get acquitted in the end, but you might have had to spend the night in jail. You might have had to pay a lawyer. You might have to do some classes. You might have to deal with someone like this about what happens with school. So it's just, those are the ramifications.
There are many new ways to consume marijuana, including wax pens, edibles, modified plant strains, and more. Do you think this has led to the confusion around the safety of the substance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back to what I said a few minutes ago, this long-held belief of it's just a plant, as you move further and further into high concentrations of THC, you're moving further and further away from the actual plant and what naturally develops in. And even in flower, you go back to 1960s all the way up through the 90s, and the THC content, the percentage was between 2 and 5%. Up through the early 2000s, it moved up to around 8 to 10%, and then over the past 10 to 15 years, it's gotten up to 20 to around 30, 35%. So that's still a lot of THC in the flower compared to back in the day, but then you think of the 50% to 90, 95. I've even heard of 99%. I haven't done research on it, but I've just in some reading that they're trying to get as pure a form of THC as they can, and so you start thinking about how different those numbers are, and there are just more inherent risks that come along with that. ERs, clinical settings like ours, treatment centers are seeing more and more that people who have been using more regularly with high concentrations of THC, if they're stopping their usage, the withdrawal symptoms are looking more and more similar to opiate withdrawal, heroin, opiate painkillers. It's still not quite as intense, but definitely more severe withdrawal symptoms than what we used to see, which was like appetite disturbance, irritability. Now there's more gastrointestinal distress, anxiety, sleep difficulties. All of those are heightening a bit. And so I think it does speak to some of the higher risks that come along with it, not to mention just links with, and there's still a lot of research being done on it, but links with, anxiety, depression, psychosis. Not that the drug usage causes it, but if someone does have a genetic predisposition, and which essentially means that there's some family history of that, they're more at risk, and other stress, but also substance use can influence the activation of otherwise latent traits.
Marijuana is known as a gateway drug, though it is not chemically addicting. What are the possible dangers of using it recreationally?
Sure. I would not agree that it's not chemically addicting, first of all. I think that's part of the misconceptions. I think that it is chemically addicting, and especially with higher THC levels. I think that's part of the risk that comes along with it. Not that everyone's going to get addicted, again, but I think that there are risks. Sorry, I forgot the question because I got caught up on that.
No worries. What are the possible dangers of using it recreationally?
Sure. I mean, I think some of what I just spoke to applies. I think, again, sometimes, not a majority of the time, or not most of this, or not all the time, but sometimes accidents happen, and people, whether it's their first time using or whether they're just under the influence, it's why someone can be pulled over, even though there are complications with it that you're mentioning, that they can be pulled over because it does impair certain brain functioning, especially, I think of a college population, and CSUN has a larger age range of students on our campus, which is great. But when you think of brain development, the brain isn't fully developed till around 25, 26 years old, particularly the frontal cortex, which is planning, executive functioning, thinking through consequences, decision making. And so when you think of especially younger college students who are smoking recreationally or on a regular basis, there's this feeling of invincibility generally in youth. And so I think once you put that with having fun and enjoying yourselves, that for some people there can be added risks in terms of making decisions. Less so, I would say, with like violence with smoking weed. Usually people get anxious or chill out a bit or get paranoid. It's more like alcohol, cocaine, the other stimulants where aggression seems to come out more, PCP, meth, all those things. But there definitely are risks with recreational use. But I also am sure to always talk to, like, if you know the risks and you take care of yourself, there is safer usage, absolutely.
And many believe marijuana is a controversial topic socially. Do you think that it'll reach a point where it's viewed similarly to alcohol, which is arguably more dangerous?
I think it kind of already is there. I think, and I agree that alcohol is linked with more deaths, more sexual assaults, more accidental injuries. But I do think that even before legalization, I think that marijuana use is more within the mainstream than it used to be. I think social media has a large, or plays a large role in that, in terms of influencers smoking regularly, or how-to videos on YouTube. I think that all plays a role in how much more regularly people are using. I think there's still, I think it's such a complex issue in terms of, like, it depends on what population you're asking.
It's generational.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I have a question for Ms. Mattern. CBD products are more accessible now than marijuana products. Is there a legal difference between consuming CBD and THC?
Yes. Okay. So CBD is non-psychoactive and THC is psychoactive. So CBD is more like it's derived from hemp, and President Trump legalized cultivation of hemp. So that means CBD is legal. So that means that you can, that's why you see it at Rite Aid and Costco, and you can use it. It's not going to give you that, what you would say, a high. It's not going to give that euphoric feeling. So they are very different. It does, and it can help with pain, and it helps a lot with what he was talking about before, which is anxiety. And so, yeah, when, like, let's say you get a DUI, one of the things that it might say is how much CBD, how much THC. Okay, but that CBD number is a legal number, and the THC number may or may not be a legal number. And the question is, are you impaired? So,
what is the difference between state and federal laws concerning recreational use?
There is none, because it's illegal. If you're talking about THC, so, you know, the kind of cannabis that people use to get high, smoke, not CBD, but THC related, that's illegal under federal law. And I don't know that I see that changing anytime in the near future. There are a lot of other interests, pharmaceutical companies that may have an interest in that not changing. So that's the difference with the two.
And this is for Dr. Silver. You work with students to educate them on issues related to substance. Do you think there are enough programs and educators working on this topic?
Are you asking about generally or on campus, or?
I would say in general, specific to the college population. I guess that can be on a broad or more.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the specifics about which programs are out there. For our campus, I know that, especially over the past couple of years, we've really been trying to develop the resources that are available to students. There's obviously my clinical support. Students can call to schedule an intake with me, and then I kind of assess at that first appointment, or second, if we run out of time, that first appointment, what level of care might be the most appropriate. So sometimes I might meet with them for a handful of sessions, because we're a brief counseling center. Other times I'll get them linked up off campus. And then we're always doing all sorts of education with regards to safety around alcohol and drugs. Safe Spring Break Week the fair was supposed to take place today, but it got rained out, but we always have that. And then I'm always doing programming around campus with links between alcohol and other drugs and different mental health issues. But there's also, just nationally, there's oversight. There's, there's a million acronyms with a million different organizations who oversee college campuses, but we can be held accountable for not having enough education, because it is very important that students are educated and have access. So we're always working to create enough programming and have resources available to students.
And what do you feel the next steps are for marijuana? It has business benefits and it is not going anywhere. What needs to be figured out to make it more fluid in society, do you feel?
Perhaps an idea would be dealing with the regulation. I think that's one of the important things, is the regulation and the purity, and making sure that people are getting what they're buying. Like you described, they have content and everything. People need to know what they're getting.
And just, I guess it gets back to your question about education. It's more and more part of the mainstream. It's legal in California and other states. People need to know what the content is of what they're using, but also, even when it's known what's in it, how to use it to reduce the potential harm.
Thank you so much. That's all we have time for today.
Here's to the things that can keep us safe. Those we use all the time with hardly a thought. Those that are silently standing by to save our lives. And now, those that we carry with us everywhere we go. Many mobile devices will now bring you wireless emergency alerts, real-time information directly from local sources you know and trust. With the unique sound and vibration, you'll be in the know wherever you are.
Yo, Scott.
Hey.
I'm heading out, man. You want to ride?
No, I got my car, but I actually really need to go to the bathroom.
Oh, you know what? I was just in there. The line is like 10 people long.
You know, I think I'll just...
Dude, are you okay?
You wouldn't believe what I was just thinking. I am definitely buzzed.
Yeah.
I think I will take this, and I will take that ride home.
Smart man.
Did you see how that dog was looking at me?
Do you know what to do?
Yes.
Bring it back to me. Then I'll give you your money.
Frank Thomas, you are under arrest for the theft of trade secrets. Come with me.
Bye-bye, Frank. Theft of trade secrets is illegal.
If you love them enough to crawl into a play place to get them to come down, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
Hey, let's check out this park. Oh, wow, that's really cool. To find a great local park or forest near you, go to discovertheforest.org.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on social media at CSUN On Point. You can hear us on KCSN 88.5 FM Sunday mornings at 5:30. You can watch us on Santa Clarita Valley Television on Sundays at 11 and at 5, and on LA 36 at 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoons. For On Point, I'm Brittany Smith.